Welcome on our channel, and we continue to study animal behavior today, and we will discuss several concepts that relate to zoopsychology and mental process. And as usual, we have a lot of links to the video, and a little homework for today will be soon. So let's go back to the last slides of third practical. We have completed our review of Pavlov's concept of the formation of conditioned reflex as one of the form of learning behavior, and now we characterize the Pavlov's concept in the general. You see the two nerve centers in central nerve system in a cortex of the brain, and as usual we have the certain conditional reflex, and these conditional reflexes are built on the basis of the unconditional ones, and the building of the conditional reflex is based on the formation of the temporal connection between two cortical centers. And important role in the mechanism of interaction between different cortical regions play cortical, subcortical, cortical pathways, and the dominant phenomenon, dominant nerve center. When conditioned and unconditioned stimuli are combined, the excitation is summated, and nervous cells of both cortical regions are involved in a rhythmic activity, and circulation of the impulses along the same neural chains ensures and the formation of temporal connection will be, and functional changes are important only for brief impression of trace of stimuli on the cortex, like a short-term memory and long retention of the temporal connection. Its long-term memory is based on the same molecular plastic changes taking place in the synapses of neurons in these centers. And as usual, I give you the links on the structure of the synapses if you don't know, or just don't study the physiology with us now. And very important for understanding this term, it is inhibition in central nerve system, and today we will discuss about the inhibition. But in general, you know the rules for building of the conditioned reflex. It's different combination of conditioned and unconditioned stimuli. Conditioned stimulus should be given 1 to 5 seconds before. Unconditioned stimulus should be stronger, and conditioned stimulus should be in different isolated room. It's very important, and to prevent outside stimuli, and don't break or just don't inhibit the reflex, and the animal should be healthy and in active state, and to include the stimuli from visceral organs. The external should take place at the same time every day. It's several dozen of combinations should be done during the experiment. It's very important for formation the long-term memory. At the end of the experiment, reinforcement should be given, and to know if conditioned reflex has been formed. And even sometimes for some animals this reinforcement should be given every time. And the law of strength of Pavlov, the direct dependence of the intensity of the conditioned reflex and the stress of the conditioned stimulus. And now let's watch this slide and conditional reflex in short. And here we see this conditional reflex can be inhibited. What is this inhibition in the central nerve system? Exactly, we have already met this concept in animal physiology, especially practical class 11, inhibition in the central nerve system and nerve centers. It's necessary to recall that there are also unconditional inhibition, and I mean the conditioned reflex itself can be slowed down, and here we see the slight classification of types of inhibition of conditioned reflex. In general, inhibition can be unconditioned and inhibition can be conditioned. What is this? As you can see on the slide, we can divide the inhibition of the reflex unconditionally and conditionally. Let's look at unconditional inhibition. We see two types: unconditional inhibition, at first it's external inhibition, and protective inhibition. External inhibition is caused by the appearance of distracting stimulus, a new sound, steps, just noise. Because it's very important to keep the animal in a special room without any sounds, and that is why we called separate conditions for the development of conditional reflexes, and there was a special soundproof room in this case. And here we see the dog in a special soundproof room. In this case, the dog has a reflex to light, for example for light, but we turn on the extra signal. For example, it is the bell, and here we see this animal just stop eating, and inhibition is carried out due to the manifestation of the reflex of orientation. Here we see orientation reflex. Any new stimulation suppresses the current conditioned activity. Just the animal hears something, and of course this temporarily can be temporary in this case, but sometimes it can be permanent. So, what is this external inhibition? Conditioned reflex is weakened or suppressed by stimulation, excitatory process. So, simultaneous excitatory process. And even one more. The orientation reflex. What is this? It has a special place among unconditioned reflex. It is a reflex response to novelty by any sufficiently quick change in the external environment, and is outwardly expressed in earnestness, listening for new sounds, or turning the eyes and head and sometimes the whole body towards the stimulus. And this reflex facilitates best reception of the acting agent and has great adaptive significance. As Pavlov described this just like an irritation reaction, and just like a question, what is it? A reflex. And unconditioned internal occur due to the stimuli arousing new reflex reaction. And here we see the different kind of inhibition, like temporary or constant inhibition, and this inhibition first based on the orientation reflex, and it's any inhibitory factor, and constant inhibition any factor of biological importance. It can be just even in pain in organism, and as you remember, the first our question was, it's like the animal should be healthy without any pain in organism, and of course in active state. Unconditioned inhibition, the second part. It is the protective inhibition. Extreme deceleration in case of applying a signal of too much stress. For example, too bright a light or even a flash, and it's like a protection of sensory system. And here we see unconditioned inhibition. Unconditioned inhibition is a more difficult question. And if the conditioned stimulus is repeated without unconditioned base for several times, reflex becomes just suppressed. And here we see the mouse, and it very funny. It happy because he has this reflex becomes suppressed with the time when we just don't give this mouse to cheese. Importance: brain does not keep reflexes and habits which are not necessary. If it's not necessary, just this reflex start to suppress. Example for this in a dog. In a dog has been previously conditioned to calm when we hear the bell because he knows we will get it will get the food, but at the previous handful of times the dog did not receive food, so no longer comes when it hears the bell. And the future as another example applied on here. We see this with this mouse. And different inhibition. Firstly, conditioned response might be given to different stimuli, and this stimuli to conditioned stimulus and generation period of the reflex activity, and after several repetitions a response is given accurately to certain stimuli only. For example, it can be only a red color of the light. Its importance is the base for learning, of course, for learning. And one more example, was different sounds, not with the color of the light. With the different sounds, it can be the same. One conditioned signal that reinforced as chosen out of many similar. It is sound too, but sound with differences. So one more inhibition of delay of unconditioned base is delight. The established conditioned reflex is inhibited. And importance: organism give response only to stimulus applied in proper time. And delay: if reinforcement is later, it's not only 2 minutes, it can be as a time even shorter. Response salivation also will be later for 2 minutes, for example, and it's just a self-control. So conditioned inhibition. And here we see the lamp sound, and complex without reinforcement becomes inhibition. A type of differentiation: here we see the food, salivation, and here we see the sound plus flash, and it's a conditioned inhibitor, and just suppress of reflex. And here we see the new slide, and we will discuss about the type of nerve system. Now what we know everything about inhibition, we will move on the consider neural process and what they affect, namely the formation of the certain type of nerve system. And according to the Pavlov's work, the Pavlovian types of nerve system, it based on the configuration of the 3 nerve system properties of strength, mobility, and the base of the nerve process of excitation and inhibition. And here we see the type of nerve system determines the rate of which conditioned reflexes are built, the strength and stability of these reflexes, the rate of the irradiation and concentration of the nerve process agrees or less. And here we see two various influences causing pathology in high nerve system, and in general characteristic of nerve processes. It is the force working capacity of the cortex neurons, and the ability to withstand long-lasting and high-intensity stimuli, balance. It's the interaction between inhibition and excitation, and flexibility, ability of neurons to go from excitation to inhibition and back. And of course, if the animal has a very good relatives with the neurons in the cortex, it's very good for understanding and studying the nerve process, and especially types of nerve system. Both it's according to the works of Ethology, the photo of super, I think it's a super psychologist, and I will leave the links to his works. Ethnic theory of personality we studied on our course of physiology, and both Pavlov and Ethnic they have the equal theories and their typologies with the Hippocratic-Helen temperaments, and you know this test, Ethnic system test. And then decides that all types of nerve system divided on the melancholic, choleric, phlegmatic, and sanguinic temperaments result from the different combination of the superfactors in a nerve system. And the Pavlovian types of nerve systems the same are based on the configuration of the three nerve system properties, like we said, the strength, mobility, and balance of the nerve process, inhibition and excitation. And here we see these types of nerve system, like nerve process with a strong or weak. Strong can be balanced and non-balanced. It's calm, phlegmatic, and balanced with the mobile abilities. It's sanguinic and still like a choleric activity. And of course, you know this description, like choleric, strong but unbalanced nerve process characterized by excitation, the predominance of excitation. Sanguine, strong, well balanced, highly mobile nerve process. Phlegmatic, strong, well balanced but with low mobility and low mobility all nerve process. And melancholic, extremely weak development of the both excitation and inhibition. All nerve system it's unbalanced and with low mobility. Here this is just a picture like different nerve system types, but I just do you remember we have the just lab work with the ethnic personality test in our course of physiology, and do you remember this just a quiz with a question to you, and in our practical work we just do this test, but for you now it's more interesting to understand what kind of nerve system types of high nerve system we has. For example, our dog has. For this, I just give you the video, and it is very interesting video. Let's look now. So here we see the absolutely different types of temperaments. And first, I think that this dog is the alpha dog in this group, but then I understand that this one is the alpha, because absolutely alone, it dog just eat all food at first, and this animal brown, I think that it's a younger person like in this group, and of course is with a choleric temperament, but let's look at this one. This is the perfect perfect dog in this group, very very smart. And let's look a little bit more. Of course, I think it depends on the breeds of these dogs. So how it all ended you can find on the link here, but I want to say that this dog with a very very strong nerve system, and why did they do this, and who dominates in this group of animals. And so we will move on the next slide. This slide just take us to the amazing world of the mental phenomenon. The world of the mental phenomena is a collection of all phenomena and processes that reflect the main content of the psyche and psychology. It is a very big part of the science, especially for humanity, and psychology studies as a specific branch of the knowledge. And here is a collection of all phenomena in the mental world, and even more, that we will study the zoopsychology, not just the psychology for humans. And those psychologists study of psychology of animals in general, and approaches to the study the behavioral start from the ethology, and here we are now in comparative psychology. I hope you remember the previous hour practical. And next we will move to the behavioral ecology and evolutionary psychology in the future. But it's very important for vet doctors, because an animal psychologist is a professional who is adept in studying animal biology and behavior in order to work safely and efficiently with them. They examine the cognitive process of animals, which includes phylogenetic history, adaptive significance, and development of the behavior in order to diagnose any significant disorders. So we have this description like a role of the animal psychologist. Just you have to describe the behavioral and explain behavioral, and sometimes predict behavioral and even change behavioral of some animals. And traditional animal psychologists used to study the lives of animals and concentrate on their biology, their surroundings in which they exist, and their interaction with and to people, and that has evolved in recent years as psychologists has expanded into animal psychology. And animal psychology is divided into two categories. It is practice and theory, and animal psychologists do this academic study to investigate how animals interact with one another, like communal groups, and predator and prey, for example, and their relationship with the environment, and their relationship with humans and our own development. And they are more similar to naturalists than most biologists, and some academics and researchers may travel through the world to watch animals and their native habitats. And of course we will have a lot of examples for the wild animals and for domestic animals. In a practice, animal psychologists are employed as those nature reserves and other animal parks to monitor, reach and encourage animal welfare, and many of those around the world have this animal psychology discovered by providing enrichment programs such as toy and games, as well as basic problem solving puzzles, so that animals may earn food. And this came as a result of worries about the mental health of animals, and they are also able to find work in the veterinary field. They may treat mental illnesses in animals, and we discuss about this. For example, stereotypical behavior, if the animal keep in a very bad stressful surrounding, for example. And return to our slide. So here I just mark it in blue as the place where stop it, and here we see the temperaments and character, and here even this mechanism of evolution, and like parts of the mental process with evolutionary mechanism. And do you remember this dog with evolutionary in a video we watched in the last video? So I mark it in blue, the place where we stop, green the market where we will be going in the future, but let's start with the red one. It will be a long journey, of course, and we'll start today with the mental processes, namely cognitive processes, and especially this part. And we will talk about memory, but in the future we will talk about the speech, signaling system, feelings, emotions. It's like a parts of the mental state and activity. And in the previous video we also observed not only volitional mechanism of the dogs, but observed emotions, and we will talk about them later. This is a particularly important topic for veterinary practice, for the veterinary doctor, and as emotion help in making a diagnosis. You are veterinary students, understand that a dog will not tell you the delight symptoms of his diseases and will not show you the place where he is in pain, but with the help of the emotions that she expresses, we can guess about it. And this is why the observation of the manifestation of the emotions and most importantly their recognition is so important for the veterinary medicine. And this is so important that we will separate it onto a separate practice. And today we will start with cognitive abilities. And here with the new slide, what is the cognitive psychology? Cognitive psychology is a scientific study of mental processes such as attention, language use, memory, perception, and solving the problem, and just creativity and reasoning. And we have the cognitive ethology is a branch of ethology concerned with the influences of conscious awareness and intention of the behavior of an animal. And a zoology professor of United States, Donald Griffin, set up the foundation for researches in the cognitive awareness of animals within their habitats, and the fusion of the cognitive science and classical ecology into cognitive ecology, and emphasizes observing animals under more or less natural conditions, with the observe of understanding the evolution, adaptation of function, of course, and causation, and the development of the specific behavioral repertoire. And this one, we just start from the memory today. Of course, memory is very important for learning. And at first we start from this slide, how animals and humans learn about the world today. And in previous practice we talked about learning, and without memory it is impossible. It's just with the memory that we will begin the study of cognitive abilities, and since this is the basis for the formation of everything. And memory is the facility of the mind by which data or information is encoded, stored, and extracted when it needed. It is the retention of information over time for purpose of influencing future action. If past events could not be remembered, it would be impossible for personal identity to develop. And on the slide we see a complex relationship between learning, memory, and attention, and perception, and just other cognitive properties. Does memory affect behavior? Of course, yeah. This slide shows different types of memory. Let's look on these different states, and here we see the different kinds of memory. Here one, short-term memory and long-term memory, and even here we'll see the structures of the brain. And the place of its formation, where we will find the neurons for each kind of memory. And as usual, I will add the links to the practice on the physiology. Our physiology works if you want to know more about the structures of the brain. It's very important for just vet doctors. If you just study the zoopsychology for yourself, it's not so very important. And for animals, there is also a genetic memory, that manifests itself in the form of instinctive behavior. It's very big question in psychology. Term and genetic memory is the memory that are present of birth and that experience in the absence and sensory experience. And what is the genetic memory in general? Genetic memory is the theory, that phenomenon in which certain kinds of memories could be inherited, being present at birth. And while theories about the inheritance of specific memories have been thoroughly disproved, some researchers have accepted that more general association formed by previous generations can pass through generation to generation through the genome. So it's in the future we will talk about this, but what is the memory? Memory refers to the presence that I used to store, retain, and later retrieve information. And there are three major processes involved in a memory: encoding, storage, and retrieval. And in order to form new memories, information must be changed into a usable form, which occurs through the process known as encoding. And once information has been successfully encoded, it must be stored in a memory for later use. And much of this stored memory lies outside of our awareness most of the time, except when we actually need to use it. And retrieval process allows us to bring stored memories into conscious awareness. So it's very difficult to understand. I have a lot of slides. And what is this encoding? Encoding, storage, and retrieval. First one, encoding. It is the initial processing of inputs through a sensory system like ears, nose, touch, taste, and once the stimulus is sensed, it's then translated into the form of the brain can understand, and our memory can be affected. It is the stage of the information is not coded in a way that makes it easily to recall when need. Storage. Attention is focused on the stimulus, which result in the being stored in a memory area. For example, being burned by a flame, or how certain types of foods taste. And there is considerable evidence that in order to store a memory, and there must be a motor response attached to the memory retrieval. The stored memory is recalled from a memory area and used by working memory. This refers to the ability to recall the memory need. Once information is successfully stored, it must be retrievable in order to be useful. For example, after experiencing a burn, you just know a flame can harm you without feeling it again. And here we see some categories, levels of memory, like sensory memory, short-term memory, long-term memory, and we just start now from the short-term memory. What is this? And of course, this part of sensory memory, it's just a part of short-term memory. Here we see the two types, sensory memory and working memory. What is this? Sensory memory. It is the shortest term element of memory. It is the ability to look at the item for a second and then remember what it looked like. It's processed approximately just some milliseconds after each item is perceived. And the sensory memory connected with our sensory organs, and that sensory organs and sensory memory is different with the animals. We will talk about the senses of perception in animals in the course of animal physiology, so you just can read the previous lecture. Of course, they are very different from human abilities. The different kind of use, and the smell of dogs is perfect just if it's just compared with the humans one. And I will leave the links if you want, just to watch the video about super senses for animals and even more. Imagination and visualization. What is this? The sense organ creates a separate visualization of the image. Imagination or visualization for humans, this term, because of vision, is the most informative for humans, of course, but not for animals. The animals, this may not be relevant, so it depends on the sense organ which are dominant in this animal. In this animal, sometimes we just have the differences. And short-term memory or working memory here is where memory is recalled without practicing something that happened recently, and short-term memory is dependent on the regions of the frontal or parietal lobes of the cortical part of the brain and acts as a kind of sketch pad for temporal recall of the information which is being processed at any point in the time, and has been referred to as the brain's posting note. And here we see that just a region repetition. It's very important for formation for long-time memory. If we just don't have this repetition, we just have the 1 minute memory, short-term memory, and forgetting. And you know this funny picture with the golden fishes and this just very short memory. It has very short memory. We think this. So here we see the repetition and how it works, this repetition. Working memory, we see repetition is necessary for formation long-term memory. Here we see the long-term memory, and you can see several important components. About repetition, we have already spoken about it. It is a condition for the formation of the conditional reflex, of course. In the end, long-term memory is formed like here we see this ability to store more information for long periods of the time, even sometimes all lifetimes, and like phone numbers and address from where the kids, and long-term memory can store much larger quantities of information for potentially unlimited duration. Sometimes a whole lifespan. Its capacity is it's just huge. Long-term memory is often divided into the main types: declarative memory and procedural memory implicit. And here we see these parts of declarative memory, implicit memory, and even more. So let's start from the declarative memory. It's just knowing what is memory, its fact and events, and refers to whose memories that can be consciously recalled. It's sometimes called explicit memory, since it consists of information that is explicitly stored and retrieved. So it is a more properly a subset of memory. And declarative memory can be further subdivided into episodic memory and semantic memory. And let's start from the episodic memory. It represents our memory of experience and specific events in time in a serial form, from which we can reconstruct the actual events that take place at any given point of our lives. It is the memory of autobiographic events, times, places, emotions, and knowledge that can be explicitly started. Individuals tend to see themselves as actors in these events, and the emotional change and the entire context surrounding our event is usually part of the memory, not just the bare facts of the events itself. And if you think that it's impossible for animals, it's your mistake. And even and semantic memory, a type of long-term declarative memory, and comprises facts about the world that are not linked to particular events on context. And semantic memory involves knowing that, and for example, Paris, the capital of the France. And if you, of course, this is a description for humanity, of course, but in a short on this slide, here we see in short to describe categories of the declarative memory. And sometimes it seems impossible for animals, of course, sometimes yes, to form such a memory in animals, but modern research shows overviews, and episodic memory is one the inclusion, while you can have theme M without am, where and when, yes. And now we have a lot of discoveries. It's not unique for humans, no. I will leave a link to a very interesting blog where you will learn more about these types of memory for animals, and arguments for different kinds of memory, for example, even for birds. It's catching birds. Here we just see this, and here this link, and even a scientific article, can animals time travel? This for long-term memory that we are not constantly aware of, such as how to ride a bike, for example. So move to the next slide. Let's look at the following kind of the long-term memory. Here with the new one, procedural memories. It's basic motor skills, for example, handwriting, or just like for this dog showing of his skateboarding skills. And even for bicycles, sometimes horse for humans, of course, it's like procedural memories. And here we see the long-term memory, implied memory, and procedural memories, the skills and tasks. And for all kinds of domestic animals, we have this kind of procedural memory, and even I will show you the video about it. So what is this next kind of memory, like a procedural memory, like a knowing how, in the unconscious memory of skills and how to do things, particularly the use of objects, of movements of the body, such as a plane, a guitar for humans, or just riding a bike. It's composed of automatic sensory motor behaviors that are so deeply in our brain connection, in a, just a neuron connection, and sometimes we call this body memories, allow us to carry out ordinary motor action automatically. And one more, there are a few different models of theories of how to describe the memory process. In general, just go to the process of memory formation. There are several theories, and here we see these theories of formation, and even we have the practice on the physiology of animals. And an example of one of the memory models, just please notice the Atkinson and Swift-Terrain model has a lot of similarities, and all the models work of the same knowledge bank, but at the same visualization process and formation, the long-term memory, or just forgotten. And what we have, memory process formation, memory encoding, and this critical first step to creating a new memory. It allows the perceived item of interest to be converted into constructs that can be stored within the brain. And sometimes it says that it's connected to the proteins, some proteins, molecules, and then recalled later form short-term memory or long-term memory. And is a biological events beginning with perception through the sense, and encoding or registration, receiving process, or combining of received information, just synonyms. And here we see the memory storage. The second one process is a more or less specific process of relating information, retailing information in the brain. Where the sensory memory, the short-term memory, or the more permanent long-term memory, and each of these different stages of human memory or animal memory function as a sort of filter that helps to protect us from the flood of information that confront us on a daily basis, avoiding overload of information and helping to keep us sane. And one more, it is remembering. Because of the way memories are encoded and stored, memory recall is effectively on the fly reconstruction of elements carried throughout various areas of our brains. Memories are not stored in our brains like books and library shelves. Of course, it is even as a collection of self-contained recordings or pictures or video clips, like many better. So what we have for today: memory recall, retrieval in short. Here we describe kinds in general types of memory, and here we see this one slide about I want to just come back to this slide, and we will talk more about attention for today. Attention, it's very important for formation of memory. And what is the attention in cognitive physiology? Attention is the process of focusing of the feeling of the something and certain where it is emotional or moral. It is a primary determinant of behavior. And here we see the attention is defined as an innate tendency inherited by the owner to recognize and focus on subjects of a particular category. This activity of concentrating our mind on one particular task is called attention. It means to take possession by the mind in clear and vivid form of one out of the several stimulus. And here this is the major different benefits of attention are for humans. And first for humans, and here this is the types of attention for humans. But for animals we have the same. More recently there has been an attempt of find animal analogous to methodologies originally applied to research with humans. And the second video I want to show you the second video, selective attention in animals during courtship. Let's watch this. almost always true. That's right. Oh, alright. So it was the second video for today with the dog, but more intellectual tasks for her, yes. And another video with the cat that performs a similar task, but you need to pay attention to the speed of reaction to the task. Almost every time you need to give a treat, we give motivation and constantly tips. Here we see the sounds. And it is the tips, of course, just show what to do to help understand what do you want. And here we see the same game. So the next slide, here we see the selective and divided attention in animals, and one line of researchers has been directed to the question of whether animals can locate and target among distractors faster if they are prepared for the presentation of the target, such an imaging and priming. In the study of such image, the target is typical food, of course, vitamin, and the cue consists of previous trials of which the same target is presented. In research of priming effects, the cue is typically differential from the target, but it is a good predictor of its occurrence. I leave a link to this article. It's very interesting. Sometimes we need to write about attention in animals for understanding attention for humans. And the end of the practice, usually I will give you the homework information. So we divided attention about some kinds of attention a little bit more, and stimulus present in more than one modality. For example, you see the different letters and in different colors. Opposite, like a yellow, not yellow. A yellow is red colored, and it has similar, it has difficulty in practice. And one more kind of attention, sustained attention in some sensory modality, temporal, spatial, and factors for attention. And one more, what is very important to sustain attention, it's meaning in consistent response during a consequous activity. Here we see this kind of attention for animals and for humans, alternating attention. And here we see the describing of just for do something like automatically. And as usual, I just in the end practice, as I give you homework. In your first book, Animal Behavior, you just should read the pages in chapter 5 about learning and memory. And as usual, this here with these links which I will leave to this video. So see you next time in practice, and we will continue our studying the mental process.